Welcome into the Fantasy Sanctuary. This is an emergency podcast for me. I need the help here. We are going to fix an awful Dynasty team. I don't have many bad teams. There's a couple of run-of-the-mill sort of ones which they need a little bit of help. But this team, it's spiraled. It's gotten out of control. And it's at the point where I need somebody to really just tell me what to do with it in places. And nobody better than the Dynasty expert himself, Rich. Rich, this team, it is bad, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I've reviewed and kind of analysed a lot of people's dynasty teams over the years. I've given advice on what to do to get yourself out of a sticky situation. But I honestly think this might be the worst team I've ever seen. So I don't mean to rub salt in the wounds, but it is pretty awful.
No, it's there of my own making. Like, go back to the original draft, and it was a case of I took veteran quarterbacks and I didn't have any kind of youth. I went all in because I didn't understand the value of dynasty picks at the time. And then things snowballed. I had players who were worth more than I sold them for. And over time, I then ended up taking more high-risk moves, trying to dig myself out of the hole. And the hole just got deeper and deeper and deeper. But I do have some draft capital to look at. So we'll get into the team. We'll move on to just how bad of a mess it is. So this is my terrible team. As you can see, the quarterbacks: Aaron Rodgers, Brock Purdy, Joe Flacco, PJ Walker. Running back: Gus Edwards, Marlon Mack, Amir Abdullah, Sony Michel. Wide receivers, okay in some regards: Marquise Brown, Odell Beckham, Rondale Moore, Tyquan Thornton, Nico Collins, Isaiah McKenzie. And then at tight end, Mike Gesicki, Hayden Hurst, Harrison Bryant, and then a bunch of picks. So when you see that, give me your instant reaction to how bad it was when you first looked at that.
Well, when you're listing Joe Flacco as a quarterback option and you're only three deep, you know you're in real trouble. But yeah, I mean, the first thing I always try to do when assessing somebody's team is what pieces have they got to build around? What are those cornerstone pieces? I'll be honest. I think your pieces that you're going to build around currently aren't on your roster. Is probably the nicest way I can say. I think you're lacking those kind of one or two pieces that you're like, right, this is what I'm building around. This is where I go from here. It feels like pretty much a full tear down and go from there, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I feel a little relieved in some ways that Aaron Rodgers seems like he is going to play this year. If he'd retired, it would have been just devastating. I'm just really not sure what I would have been able to salvage from that. Marquise Brown, if DeAndre Hopkins moves on, that should give me an opportunity to sell there, which I'm kind of hoping on. And Odell Beckham, I'm hoping that in free agency that he eventually signs with a team. And there should be these little windows that can open up. But at running back, it's completely nothing. And you can see in this, which is your traffic light system that you like to use for going through and learning how to evaluate your roster. And I'd recommend anyone watching this should go back and watch the how to assess your dynasty roster video that you did. It's brilliant. It helped me really learn how to assess things on a better level. And thankfully, not all my rosters are this bad. But you can see that you go through it and it's just all these red lights, all these player rankings. So these are your dynasty rankings for the numbers that are in them. And normally on this screen, there would be yellows, there'd be greens of, players who ranked well. But here, Aaron Rodgers, QB 17, Marquise Brown, wide receiver 30. And it just kind of reinforces what you were saying about how there's very little to build around. In terms of age, this is the second thing that you always kind of emphasize, or situation for the players. There's a few orange lights there. There's a couple of green ones. I mean, Rondale Moore is tied to the Cardinals for a couple of years, Tyquan Thornton to the Patriots. But when you look at it from that perspective, is there anything that kind of, you're surprised to see, or are you, actually, it's like, oh, actually, that's not too bad. There's a couple of these bits, but if the right things swing their way, you could start to build out from there, or is this just really tear down?
I think that if you try and be positive, okay, first of all, I've never seen a roster I've probably reviewed over 100 rosters. I've never seen a roster that is red across the board in terms of the first traffic light. So the first traffic light we're looking at, basically, is it a positional advantage over the rest of my league? Am I average? Am I below average? I've never seen below average every single starting spot. That is so well done. That's an
Thank you.
achievement. The positive spin on this is that I think although you've got some underwhelming assets, shall we say, I think you're in an interesting spot because I think a lot of these players, you can tell yourself a story of how they're going to peak in value over the next 6 months. And I think that that's how you need to be looking at this is that, look, I don't know if I'm breaking any news to you here, Tom. You're not competing in 2023. You need to be looking 2024 and beyond. Okay. So what you need to be looking at is I'm not necessarily looking for specific players. I'm not necessarily looking for pieces that are going to be on my team in 2024. All you're looking to do is raise the entire roster value from now until probably the middle to end of the season. So we're talking sort of November, December time. So all you're looking to do is to acquire assets that are going to rise in value over those next 7 months. You're going to look to basically spin off any asset that increases in value to a point in which you think that is their peak value that they're going to be over the next 10 months. Okay. So
just picking up on what you're saying there, just to interrupt. So like Mike Gesicki, free agency starts next week. If Mike Gesicki signs with the Chargers next week or signs with like the Commanders, is that a move where you'd be ready to just sell straight away? Or are you thinking, when the games start getting played and the touchdowns start coming, would you prefer to wait knowing that there might be an even higher peak for him? Because obviously we're in the height of rookie season and everyone's quite attached to their picks at this point. So try to sell some of these players who don't have real elite upside. Do you think it's easier to sell them now on the back of free agency or in the season when they start catching touchdowns?
I think it depends on a couple of things. It depends on who that player is, and it depends on how big the hype gets. I think, take for example, Mike Gesicki. You mentioned him. I think that I'm not a big Mike Gesicki believer, so I'm probably not going to look to hold him until the season because I think that if there's any sort of value spike, you look to sell. But also, what you need to be doing, Tom, is you're looking to get rather than, let's throw numbers. Say Mike Gesicki is, worth 2. If he became worth 4 because of he signed somewhere in free agency, I'd look to get that 4. It could be that if you held out till the start of the season and he starts playing well, he's now worth 5, say. But what I'm looking to do is I'm not just looking to spin Mike Gesicki once. I'm looking to spin whatever you get for Mike Gesicki again, so that 2 becomes a 4, that 4 becomes a 6, and all of a sudden you're at 8, rather than holding Mike Gesicki and you might be at 5 by the time the season starts. You need to be almost the volume game. You're not going to turn this roster around in one trade.
Yeah,
you need to be making, numerous trades that if you can win each trade and add, $1 in value to however you want to add value or equate the value of your roster, you need to marginally increase the value of your roster every single time. And it's about volume of transactions and ever so increasingly just creeping up that value. And it's not about just going out and buying one asset. It's about making the volume of transactions that enables you to increase that overall roster value.
I think that's a brilliant way to look at it. And it's that kind of like all too often we look at dynasty trades and it's like, oh, well, is that player going to make my roster a lot better? Can I really be bothered to do that? Or would I rather hold on to the player I've got? And that's something which a lot of dynasty players struggle with. Players on their roster become people they become attached to them and it's hard to move on from them. I don't have any attachment to any of the players on this roster, so that won't be a problem. So yeah, it's that little sort of, I think the big thing for me is that this is a league which I'm going to have to spend a lot of time on and a lot of attention. But it's not a league that I wasn't willing to just throw in the towel on, and I'm not going to leave an orphan like this for the league to try and have to deal with. So it is a project which I enjoy because, like I say, a lot of my rosters aren't in shapes like this. A lot of my rosters are good teams or they're rebuilds on purpose. They're not like this. So I think it's definitely something I'm going to be spending a lot of time on, just trying to get those little incremental leaps from, if that means getting from Taekwon Thornton up to somebody with slightly more value, or packaging Taekwon Thornton and a third to maybe get there, then that's something which I'll be interested in. In terms of types of trades that you would target, I know you're saying target a lot of them. Obviously, I'll go back to the first page and you can kind of see that I've got a reasonable amount of draft capital this year. I've got the 106 to 107, 108. This is a super flex, not tight end premium. I've got the 203 and the 212. I've got 4/3. And then next year, I've got my own first and I've got 3 seconds. So one of the things that happened in this league was 2 years ago, I traded my first round pick for this. So I didn't have my first. So I tried absolutely everything to ensure that I wasn't going to end up with the 101 this year. The guy who had it would not trade it back to me. He was determined to keep hold of it. And so I ended up finishing, I think it was 10th in this league. And it took every ounce of effort to scrape together wins so that I didn't finish in 12th, because there was no way I was going to gift him the 101 with my trade from 2 years ago. But with that kind of set of picks that I've got, is there anything in particular that stands out that you would be using them to try and do? Or would you be just trying to take as many shots as possible in the rookie draft?
I think let's be honest, you're not struggling for roster spots, so I'd be keeping as many of those picks as possible. I say to everybody every single time I talk to any rosters, investigate their value, investigate what you can get. Don't just sit there and say, because I'm rebuilding, I have to make these picks. If somebody's going to give you good value for one of those picks, then absolutely make the move. As I said earlier, you're not one player away. So if you can get better than the current value of the 106 for that pick, I'd be making that trade, because it's about increasing the overall roster value. One thing I would say about picks is, as we get into hype season and rookie fever takes hold, let's start to potentially inquire about, can you spin some of those 2023 picks into 2024 picks? So could you turn the 106 into a 2024 first and a 24 second? Could you turn the 108 into a 2024 first and a 24 third or something? I think I would currently trade any pick after the 108 for a 24 first. So if you could spin this is not in your league, Tom, but in a generic league, the 109 for a 24 random first, I would do that deal. So I think you need to be exploring the value of those picks and be open to trading them. Don't think that just because you're in a complete rebuild, the picks are the only thing, because actually, if you can move those picks for better value than they're worth, that could help you. But I think what I'd love to do, Tom, is if we can kind of talk through each positional room, if that makes sense, and kind of what I'd be looking to do in those situations. So let's start at quarterback. So Joe Flacco, PJ Walker, we can forget about them. Okay, let's, if you want to cut them, if you want to keep hold of them, whatever, they've got no value. I hate to break it to you, Tom. Aaron Rodgers, I think, is a really interesting one, because I've perennially been higher than consensus on Aaron Rodgers over the last 2 years. It's looking like in the next few minutes it could be announced that he's being traded to the Jets. That is obviously going to become with a value boost. And I think that as his name is in circles, you're going to see potentially some people be interested in him.
Well, Aaron Rodgers in particular is an interesting one, because during this season, when I was trying to tear everything down, I couldn't even get a first-round pick for him at times. So now it's like, okay, I think I will try to either take advantage of it, or I'll wait until during the season when there's a good sell window. But yeah, definitely. Sorry, carry on, Rich.
I think the thing with Aaron Rodgers, and this is the case with any slightly older asset in Dynasty, selling them for a pure pick return is always difficult, because people don't want to give up picks for what they see as a declining asset. So you're saying there you couldn't get a first for Aaron Rodgers. I completely get that, and I've certainly been in leagues that you couldn't get a first in return. But my question to you is, could you spin Aaron Rodgers into a less valued quarterback that has the potential to peak and a second? could you take some risks on maybe a couple of quarterbacks that are currently being undervalued that have the potential to rise in value? What you're looking to do is sell high on Aaron Rodgers, but buy low on a couple of other people at a certain position. So I think you've got some the trade block on one of these slides, have you?
Yeah, let me just jump over to that. So here you go. You can see, I'll just stick with the top of it so you can see the quarterbacks. And obviously, it's pretty bare bones. A lot of people took everything off the trade block as the season wound down. So a lot of these players probably are available, but they're not listed as being on the trade block. And, that's so we can get into. I'm not about to go out and trade for Tom Brady right now necessarily, but.
So I think it's interesting you say that, because I think that what I would be looking to do, and this is the non-traditional way to rebuild. Okay, most people when they're rebuilding, they think, I want to go out and get young players, I want to go out and get picks. Okay, and that's the move that everybody does, and it takes you 2 or 3 years to rebuild, and you go from there. What I'm looking to do is I'm looking to go out and buy assets that I think could be worth more down the road. Okay, so let's take, for example, the team that has got Ryan Tannehill on the block. Okay, he's set at quarterback there. He's got Deshaun Watson. He's got Geno Smith. He's got Kyler Murray, who's obviously injured to start the season, but is probably going to come back. That person is probably looking at Ryan Tannehill as an asset that he doesn't need. So my suggestion is, can you go and buy low on Ryan Tannehill? Because he's obviously put him on the block. He's basically saying, I don't really need Ryan Tannehill. The current consensus in the Dynasty community and in the NFL community is that Ryan Tannehill is potentially not going to be the starting quarterback in Tennessee next year. Now, I think that Ryan Tannehill is too good of an NFL quarterback to not be a starter next year. So I think that you could probably buy Ryan Tannehill on the cheap now.
What kind of value do you have on Ryan Tannehill at the minute? Sorry.
I'd say I would be happy to pay a mid-second for Ryan Tannehill right now, but I don't know if you have to pay that. So could you pay less than that for Ryan Tannehill? And so then when he's the starting quarterback in September, I can guarantee that you'll get more in return for him than you will right now.
So in my case with the picks, so taking something like the 212 and maybe a couple of thirds if it had to be, or 212 and a third as an opening offer, and see just the temperature check on the owner, see whether that would be enough to do it. Because you can see this owner, they've also got Alvin Kamara and Miles Sanders on the trade block. They know that their team is going to need an injection of youth at some point. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting one to consider.
Yeah, and then the other team next to them, you mentioned about Tom Brady. They've also got Baker Mayfield. You look at their other starting quarterbacks, they've got Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. They're set at quarterback. They're basically saying, I don't need these guys. So Tom Brady's value is essentially nothing. Most people think he's going to leave. It might change after the Rich Eisen rumor that, he heard at the combine he was going to be traded. But could you go and send a 4th round pick for Tom Brady? Worst case scenario, you've just set a 4th round pick on fire. Best case scenario, he comes out of retirement, you can sell him immediately for at least a second. Okay. To me, that's, even if that's a 10% chance that you can turn a 4th round pick into a second, that's a move I'm making every day. Baker Mayfield, again, general consensus at the moment is that he's a backup quarterback. But there's a chance, whether it be as a bridge quarterback for a team that drafts a rookie, whether it be that, the way things shake out in free agency, that there's a chance that he's starting. As soon as he's starting, he's worth more. This is what I guess I'm saying is, at the moment, you're pretty desperate at quarterback. Could you take a risk and try and buy, there's a few of these that are floating around, whether it be Jacoby Brissett, whether it be Sam Darnold, whether it be Andy Dalton, players like that are currently hugely undervalued, and you can probably get for like a third, maybe a couple of thirds. But if they turn into a starting quarterback, they're immediately worth a second. No position in Dynasty has the value changes, both positively and negative, like a quarterback. So I think that if you could take a few risks at quarterback, and I'm not telling you to go and spend loads of high valued assets, you're basically third round, fourth round picks of flyers at the best. So you're spending low value capital to go and get a player that could potentially net you a decent return come September, October.
Just want to open up on just one of those points, because I think quite often in Superflex we talk about, okay, well, any starting quarterback is worth at a bare minimum a second round pick. Where do you draw the line with these guys who don't look like long-term starters? So last year I picked up Brock Purdy off waivers, and I did it in a couple of leagues, and in one league, not this one, somebody was like, well, I'll give you a third round pick for it. And it's like, nah, I'm all right. I'll stick with the second. And we're like, well, I only need it for 1 week to cover the buys. And it's like, well, and I held fair. I was like, look, you want him, he's going to cost you, I think it was like a late second or 2/3. And then I chose not to sell. Do you, in those kind of situations, do you think that profit is profit, or do you think that typically long term it's just better to hold out for those kind of higher values and wait and see what happens with the quarterbacks?
I'm not selling any quarterback for anything less than a second, because in a Superflex league, the value can change so quickly that, you know, what is a third giving me? Basically nothing. So I would rather hold a player on the off chance that they rise in value and are worth something, because, you know, let's just say Arizona, for example. Okay, Colt McCoy is worthless currently. He's under contract with the Cardinals next year. Kyler Murray's torn his ACL. He's not going to start next year. So there's a chance that Colt McCoy is worth something. A starting quarterback for maybe 10 weeks. It could, you know, who knows? Kyler could be ruled out the whole season. Colt McCoy is probably on most leagues' waivers. I noticed that someone's got him in this league. But, you know, that's the kind of player that can suddenly be worth something. You know, Geno Smith came out of nowhere. Brock Purdy came out of nowhere. It happens time and time again that I'm not selling any quarterback in any Superflex league for anything less than a second. I need a second to make that move.
Okay, so we've talked about quarterbacks for a little bit, but one of the other position, let's dig in quickly. So running back, obviously you saw my running back room. I completely tore that to the ground simply because I always feel strongly, and I know that you feel the same, but like when you're in a rebuild, there's no sense holding running backs. So I shifted anyone with any remote value, and now I'm at bare bones to the point I've got guys like Amir Abdullah and, you know, whoever else, Marlon Mack on the roster. In the draft, is that a position that you'd be looking? Because, like I say, I've got a bunch of third-round picks. Is that where you'd just be firing out third-round picks at running backs and hoping that they'd increase in value? Or would you be looking to acquire some of these guys who might be on the fringe of free agency deals that we can get into another time?
Yeah, I think, you know, if we're going to talk rookie draft, I think for me, outside of probably the mid-second, I'm not really looking at wide receiver. At that point, I'm shifting to what I class as the volume-based positions, which is quarterback and running back. And those are the positions, you know, with those third-round picks, with those fourth-round picks, I'm targeting running backs and quarterbacks because they're the players that are one injury away from suddenly coming, you know, massive rise in value. The chances of a third or fourth round rookie wide receiver suddenly, you know, having a couple of injuries and finding their way up the depth chart doesn't really happen. So yeah, in rookie drafts, I'm definitely leaning with those later picks towards running backs. In terms of what I do with your roster at the moment at running back, I'd be taking as many hits on cheap backups as I could. So what I mean by that is that I would be going out and actively looking to acquire guys like Jerome Ford, guys like Ty Chandler, guys like Salvin Ahmed, Zonovan Knight, Isaiah Spiller, guys that are similar approach to what we talked about at quarterback, that are cheap, but are the potential to see a massively increased role, whether it be, you know, perhaps Kevin Harris or Pierre Strong of New England. The chances are that, take Cleveland, for example, Kareem Hunt's gone. Dearness Johnson's probably gone. There's some rumors that Nick Chubb might be traded. Jerome Ford, I liked him as a prospect last year. there's a chance that he could step into a massive role, and people don't realize that yet. And those are the kind of guys that I'd be looking to that. Ty Chandler, Alexander Mattison's gone. Dalvin Cook can't stay healthy. Would you be shocked if, week 4 of the season, Dalvin Cook suddenly dislocated his shoulder for like the 5th time? Ty Chandler's the starting running back on the Minnesota Vikings. I wouldn't be shocked. And then that's an opportunity for you to sell him off for a 2nd-round pick or another player, and it's that spinning again process. And I think that in a rebuild, yes, I'm looking to build around wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends. I don't like investing value at the running back position. But there is a massive differentiation between value and volume. And whilst in a rebuild, I'm not looking to spend high value, high capital. I don't want Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker or these big named, expensive running backs because their career can end suddenly. But I want 10, 15 running backs on my roster because that position, along with quarterback, a player can suddenly shoot up in value because of one injury or one coaching decision or something like that. So I'm tilting my roster towards, I want the wide receivers that I'm looking to build around, and then I'm just fleshing it out with as many running backs as possible because that's where the quick wins come from that you can spin.
Lovely. I think we've kind of touched on a lot of really good stuff. I mean, you can see in this league that, it's quite a deep league. And one thing I just wanted to touch on is the types of managers who you would be targeting for trades. So obviously I've got 3 first-round picks. I've got a bunch of 2nd-round picks next year. But when you're in a rebuild or, whatever this is, which is far beyond a rebuild, is there certain types of managers who you are more aggressive targeting?
Yes and no. I think one of my things is that I hate people projecting draft picks beyond kind of the midpoint of the season that they're actually in. Anybody sitting here now saying, oh, that's an early 2024 first it's just wrong. Unless that's your pick. And look, Tom, we can sit here and say your 2024 first rounder is hopefully going to be the 101. That's going to be an early pick. I can almost guarantee that. But if somebody's trading you their first rounder, chances are they're not just going to sit there and basically not compete. They could make a series of trades, and you can turn a dynasty. You can turn most dynasty rosters, not this one, Tom, around in a couple of weeks, a couple of months. You can go from pretender to contender very quickly if you get some luck, but make some smart moves. So never project too early about where those picks are going to fall. So don't sit there going, they've got a terrible roster, I'm going to go and try and get their 2024 first. That's not how it works, okay? But that being said, what I'm looking to do is identify the teams that, you talked about. There's one roster that's perhaps starting to age out, that's starting to look at that rebuild piece. Those are the kind of teams that are going to be desperate, the traditional rebuild. I need young players and picks. They're the kind of players that you can potentially get really good value in turning those picks into more. And then the other part of that, what I do is I then look at who is a true bona fide contender, but is maybe 1 or 2 injuries away from complete catastrophe. There's normally 1 or 2 teams in every league that's set up and their starting team looks amazing, but their bench is bare, and there's perhaps an injury-prone player in there or something like that. I'd be looking to see if you could spin picks this year into picks next year, because that's the kind of person that's like, oh, if I can get a wide receiver 3 in the draft this year, I'm going to win the title. But what they probably should be thinking is, I'm 1 injury away from having the 101. And that's the team that you can get huge amounts of value from.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, unless you've got anything else, I think we've kind of covered things really well. Obviously, we'll check back in with this roster on Twitter every now and again to see what successful trades I've made and kind of take on board Rich's advice. And It's just a tank for 24.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say as well is that going back to the roster of your kind of the slide of your entire roster is pick the times that you're selling players. So we talked about Aaron Rodgers being a sell high almost as soon as he signs with the Jets. Potentially, you talked about Marquise Brown being a sell high the second DeAndre Hopkins is traded. We talked about Mike Gesicki being a sell high the second that he signed somewhere in free agency. So yes, that's great. Those are sell high windows. But guess what? The person potentially buying them also knows that's a sell high window. So just be a little bit smart about that. Don't, the second Aaron Rodgers is traded, put him out on the trade block and be like, oh, come and buy me Aaron Rodgers. Because nobody's going to give you fair value for that. If you can, maybe wait a week and then go and inquire. Or, go and have those conversations before the trade happens, going, oh, DeAndre Hopkins is probably going to get traded. Marquise Brown's going to see a big boost. Do you want to buy him now before the value goes up? That the value, you're already valuing Marquise Brown as if DeAndre Hopkins isn't there, but the person that you're talking with doesn't. So whatever you do, Tom, don't stick any of these players on the trade block. Go and have conversations with owners and see if you can get good value in return.
Great stuff. Okay, folks, remember to like and subscribe before you get out of here. We've got loads more rookie content coming, got best ball content coming. Never been a better time to be a subscriber.